Hi, Jackie. How are you?
Hi, Whitney. I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. Thanks for taking the time. I wonder if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, and then we can hear a bit about your story and learn from you.
My name is Jackie Ryan. I mostly grew up in California or lived in California most of my life, but we've been in Arizona for about 5 years now, I guess. Like most people, I was born and raised in the fellowship. Third generation on both sides, maybe four on my mom's. I'm not exactly positive, but a long time. And it's been interesting just hearing the terms inherited beliefs and bounded choice that has so resonated because as we know that's kind of the space we've been in when you're born and raised and you don't feel like
Hmm.
you've got to really come to your own conclusions
Yeah.
about some things. So
Hmm.
yeah, so most of my time was in California, but now Arizona, and that's kind of my background
Hmm.
as far as that goes. When I was younger, we moved a lot, and then also when I was young, I was a victim of CSA as well. Not anyone in the church, but all of those things together kind of made me kind of isolate a little bit and put up a lot of barriers, and that was just kind of a safe place for me. And that worked well for a lot of my life. And then, of course, we weren't really encouraged to have friends outside of the church. And I never really grew up with any kids my age. So there weren't a lot of connections as I was growing up. And then that makes it hard as an adult to know how to make connections. And then now in this space of not quite knowing where I even am, it feels hard to know how to make connections. But I am thankful for some close friends that I do have. And it's nice that we all seem to be kind of going through these stages at the same time. And that's been helpful to me to kind of have other people to feel like, I'm not going crazy.
Yeah, totally. What was your experience in the early years of the church? Did you feel like it was predominantly enjoyable and meaningful to you?
I didn't question really anything. I mean, we always had meeting. We had meeting in our home. We always went to every meeting. We would go back to visit my grandparents in Missouri. And I mean, you'd travel an hour or two for gospel meeting a couple times a week. And I mean, that was just what you did. I do feel like I had personal convictions. I do feel like I learned about Jesus. And I mean, I hear a lot of people say they never heard about Jesus. That wasn't my experience. I do feel like that I did hear about him and learn about God and things, but I don't know that I felt a lot of joy. And that was just in general in life anyway. I think I was
Yeah.
just kind of in a place where that wasn't a thing that I really spent a lot of time exploring. But I didn't have bad experiences like some have had. And in fact, sometimes I'll read things and I think, wow, that has not been my experience. But, through the years, like we've all heard about that shelf, there were many things that I just couldn't quite make sense of, but I couldn't come up with an explanation, but I didn't really explore it. And we were the only true way and we were the only right ones. And there wasn't really any need to look any further than that. And now I don't know, I just feel like there's so much less time now to fill in all of those gaps. But it's just a scary place to be in some ways to feel like everything that you thought was a certain way is maybe not what you thought it was. And I think that kind of started really for me with all the news that came out about Dean Brewer. Like I didn't really explore it much before that. You couldn't look up anything, you couldn't read about stuff, you weren't to go on the internet, you're supposed to avoid
Yeah.
all of that. And I dutifully did that and I was fine
Yeah.
with that. So
So Dean Brewer changed everything for you.
well, we got the letter. I first saw it online, and that was where I first got it. And then we did get the letter. Actually, I'd already read it, and I already gotten it from a couple sources. But we did see that, and the main thing and that was horrifying. I mean, there was no question.
Mhm.
Of course, we'd gone through Ruben Mata, and we knew that there were, these isolated cases, and I still ashamed remember thinking, well, at least we're not like, that organization over there or that church over there. I think the thing that really, really got me was just the expectation that this is going to be taken care of. Like the ministry is going to be so shocked and horrified by this, and there's going to be a lamenting and a mourning, and there's going to be apologies and regret. And there was just none of that, as we know. And that was to me, that was the hugest turning point for me. Was I couldn't
Yeah.
fathom the lack of response and just and so for me I had to find out more once I knew, and as more and more names came out and more stories came out, and it was just horrifying. And I felt like the least I can do is bear witness to their story, or to listen, or to, and then it just felt like I just needed to know what was real.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. The response to the crisis was really shocking to me as well. And I wonder, how have your feelings about that changed over the last couple years? Like, it's been a couple years since a lot of us expected that, and that's kind of a long process. I wonder if you'd share a bit about the last couple years.
Well, I feel like, again, at first, I mean, it was such a slow awakening, I guess, kind of. And, and I had these high expectations, and I was waiting, and then I would have individual visits, and just kind of the lack of, well, they weren't surprised because they already knew. And so that to them, that seemed like a plus, that, well, we're not reacting in any surprise because we've known about this, as though that should make us feel better. But I know there have been individual workers, absolutely, who have done what they could and tried to speak out over the years, even, as we've come to find out. And just realizing that many of them are not at liberty either, and they can't affect change on their own. But as time has gone on, it just feels like, I don't know, silence is complicity in so many ways. And silence only helps the abuser. It only aids the abuser. That's the only person who is benefited by silence. And I just know what silence did for me, like in my own case, like, and the victim carries the shame and the guilt and the responsibility and all of that. And so when we're silent as a church, I don't know, the message to victims is just horrible. It's just horrible. And I guess what was shocking too to me was to go back once I opened the Pandora's box and went on the internet, just the letters I would read from like 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20. And it wasn't just about CSA. It was so many issues that could be written right now, today, and are written right now, today. And there's nothing's different. You could just put a different date on it and it would be the same exact story. And it's like, how can this be? How can this be? How can something perfect and God led, and I'm not saying it hasn't been at times, for sure, but how can that exist with this other part? Like, it doesn't make sense. So I just feel
Yeah.
like as time has gone on, instead of feeling better about it, I just feel like there's less and less there that makes sense to me.
So you don't have to answer this question, of course, but I'd wonder if you would share a bit about where you are right now. I know that deciding what to do after we all had such high hopes and expectations of change can be a difficult thing to figure out.
Yeah, so it's complicated for me. It feels complicated. Like, I envy people who have real clarity and like a real clear line, and they moved on, or they just know where they need to be. And I envy that because I feel like I am not in that place. I just feel unanchored. Many days I feel like I don't know where the place to be is. But it's complicated for me because most of my family is very, very in my personal family, and they don't want to know. They've accepted that whatever the workers say is just what we're going to go with. And again, I acknowledge that people have found life in this. There's no question about that, that it's very sincere, and there are very sincere and honest people. And I include my family in that.
Mhm.
So it's hard for me to just feel like, because as we know, once you say, oh, I'm out, well, then it's already being said of us, but we're lost and we're blind and we're deceived. And this idea that you can't have the Holy Spirit if you're not in the meetings, if you're not in the way. And so I don't know if it's a lack of courage or what it is, but it feels like to make that statement or to make that clear line still
Mhm.
feels very complicated and costly. And so I'm trying to thread that needle where I don't want to cause undue grief and sorrow and distance, if it's
Mhm.
possible to kind of maintain a middle ground. But that gets harder. That gets harder as time
Mhm.
goes on, because it just feels very inauthentic and not genuine. So it's
Yeah.
a tough place to be.
Yeah, it is. And there's so many of us in so many different stages that have gone through all those same feelings. It is so complicated. It is, you're wanting to maintain all of those relationships and hold on to the beauty, and there's still a lot that's hard to
Yeah.
work through. So I know what you're feeling, and I've been there too. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's good. It's been helpful to hear people's stories and read their accounts to know that, okay, we're not alone in this. I've known people who had to go through this 25 years ago by themselves alone. One of them was a very close cousin of mine, and she was basically put out. And you feel so ashamed of how little I do. I reached out or asked questions or tried to understand because we just bought in the narrative that they were, that they had lost out or they were blind or they were bitter or whatever it was. But to have gone through this alone and with no support would have been terrifying.
Yeah.
I feel like now it's so much, there is support and there are people who are going through it at the same time, and that helps tremendously. It doesn't help us make our own personal decision, but it's nice to not feel alone. I think one of the biggest analogies for me that has helped clarify is that it's like, and we've heard it before about the baby monitor. And when all this happened and victims were crying out, I mean, in distress and in despair and in sorrow and pain, and they still are and have been for years. And like we were saying, waiting for the ministry to activate and lament and be sorry. And it felt like, like turning the baby monitor off. And if a baby is crying in the other room and is in distress and you're in bed and you're sleeping and you're tired, no parent would think, well, this is really inconvenient for me and I don't want to hear this anymore and I'm just going to turn this monitor off and then go back to sleep. There's no parent that would do that. And yet that feels like that's been how this has been responded to, is like, we're just going to shut off the noise. And I hear all the time, like, well, why are you feeding on that? It's not edifying. And that's the problem, is that you're reading about this or you're feeding on this. And it's like, the problem is that it's happening, not that I know about it. And I can't quite get that disconnect. I mean, I do get it. I understand it's hard, it's uncomfortable, and it's shattering, right? It will be life-changing. And I get that it's not a place that many people can, especially if you're older. I admire these older ones who have stepped out in faith.
Yeah, it's true, because knowing about it, learning about it is painful for all of us, much more so for those who went through it and for those who experienced it and the survivors. They've been living with this and having to think about this every day. It's the least we can do to be aware and to be knowledgeable about it. That's not the problem. Yeah.
And to not ignore it or minimize it, and just the extra care that has gone to predators more really than victims in many cases, and not all. And again, these are sweeping generalizations. Obviously, there are individuals that have done a lot, and yet what's telling are the workers who have. Many of them are gone. They have been removed, or they have finally had to leave on their own. And then that's a whole other area that has been just utterly shocking to me, is to hear and read accounts of what workers have dealt with during their time in the work, their time after the work. It's I don't know, there aren't really many words to put to how disappointing that has been, to realize that we have been shown this image of it, and this is perfect ministry, and that's why the way is perfect. And then you find out what is behind that, and it is not perfect. It is not perfect at all. And there's been so much harm and damage done, and that it just doesn't work. So
yeah, it's very distressing to learn about. It's heartbreaking.
Really is. One other thing I was just going to mention is that I remember early on reading Ezekiel 34, and that's probably a chapter I've read more than anything else in the last 2 years, because it just seems to describe so perfectly what we are going through, that there are shepherds not shepherding and the sheep have scattered. But what's been so reassuring is just that at the end of that chapter, there's that promise that God knows where every single one of them is. And just to know that, as we've heard so many times, and it's been so weird to hear the same thoughts in your own brain repeated word for word by other people. But like, we did make him so small, and we did have him in a little tiny box. And it doesn't make sense when you think of this huge world, that only we could be so special as to be noticed by God. And I feel like it's been liberating in that sense of just getting to explore the idea and the realization that God's love is way bigger than that. And I don't really need to be afraid, but it's hard to be
Mhm.
in that place to really
Mhm.
get there.
Yeah. And that's all understandable too. His love encompasses that feeling too.
Yep. And just to know he understands. And to me, it's sad to think of those who, because of harm done in the church anywhere, that now don't even they have no belief. And I get that too. I understand that too. I mean, that's not an irrational response to being hurt sometimes.
Mm,
So yep, we're all
yeah,
just kind of figuring it out, floundering around, trying to
we are.
trying to make sense of some of these things. But so anyway,
Yeah,
kind of where
yeah,
I am for sure, trying to
yeah.
figure out what makes sense or how to go forward and keep lines of communication open and not get too frustrated. And it's a lot.
Uh-huh.
It's a lot.
It is a lot. I do especially appreciate you showing up and feeling conflicted and feeling kind of unanchored. I appreciate you sharing in that vulnerability because so many of us have felt that and are in those spaces, and it's so helpful to know that someone else is there with us too.
Yeah, it really is. And hopefully, if that's one thing I can extend, because like I say, I envy these people who have such clarity and they've just feel like it feels like they've got this figured out. And I just think, oh my gosh, I'm just definitely not there.
Yeah.
But I
And
appreciate what you're doing too. It's been really very helpful for me.
yeah. Well, you're very welcome. And like I say, we're all in this together. And so if anybody needs help or wants to share where they're at too, they can reach out and share because there are lots of ways that this journey can lead us. So I appreciate you sharing your part of it.
Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much for having me, Whitney. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Take
Have a
care.
great day.
You too. Bye bye.